Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sneha Sharma and I am a teacher. I'm starting my 10th year of teaching this year, and I also have a doctorate in education. Today we're going to be talking about the 3 things I wish I knew before I started my career in teaching. So when I was a baby teacher, so to speak, what are the 3 things I wish I knew ahead of time before starting that first year of teaching? And just to preface, these 3 takeaways are based on my own experience, so, definitely my own opinions, but also I do think that they could be relevant to any field, really. I think these 3 pieces of advice are relevant to anyone. So if you're curious about what I think as a teacher, and if you're curious to see if any of this will apply to you, whether or not you're a teacher, please stay tuned to hear some of my takeaways. Number 1, this is the most important one, and definitely the most applicable one, I think, to any field. Have a lot of self-compassion. And we talk a lot about, being nice to others, being considerate of others, being kind to others. But I feel like I haven't really heard this one mentioned as much, is that sense of self-compassion. If you don't understand how to do something, or you feel like you're not doing something well, don't be afraid to go out and seek help, right? But even before you can do any of that, before you can ask anyone for anything, you need to be comfortable with the fact that you might not be perfect at everything on the first try. This is especially important in your first year in anything, especially your career, because chances are this is your first legit career outside of school, or maybe it's just something new to you and you haven't had a lot of experience yet. So it's going to be tricky. And I think especially in teaching, it is such a difficult profession on so many different levels, right? Like the emotional side of it, the technical side of it, all of it. So I just wish if I could go back to year 1 teacher, right? Teacher version of me, I would tell her, calm down, don't be so hard on yourself, and understand that you need to have like a growth mindset about this. Like, don't worry that you're not good enough. You got the job for a reason, so don't ever worry that you're not going to be able to do this. And that would probably be my number one like piece of advice to anybody who's starting a new career, is like, just keep reminding yourself you got this because you're here for a reason. Number 2, this kind of builds on point number 1, but my second point that I want to share is to self-advocate. Right, so we talked about self-compassion, but you got to self-advocate. Self-advocate essentially means that you stand up for yourself, that if you don't understand how to do something, you go to people who are able to help you. And this seems like a really obvious one, but I feel like so often we think like, I'm just gonna figure it out on my own. Like, I'm not gonna have to, I don't want to ask anyone, I don't want to like bug anyone for help, right? And I think that's such a like a self-limiting, like annoying way of doing things, because it just makes it harder on you to try to figure out what to do. So for example, if there's a task at work that you're really struggling with, it is okay to go to somebody who's more experienced and ask for their help. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I remember when I was a new teacher, I was struggling really with one class in terms of getting those students to follow directions. And I invited a teacher who was way more experienced than me to come into my room and observe the students and then give me feedback. And I think that teacher was only in there for like 5 minutes, but it was so helpful to get their perspective on what I could have been doing better. And that, as I look back on that, that required a lot of courage. That required me to like be really humble and be like, look, I need help. And now I know that that was me advocating for myself. Another way of doing this is, if you are, trying to build your network at work, it's okay to basically put yourself out there and be like, hey, would you like to get lunch, or would you like to work on this with me, or whatever, right? There's ways to build those connections with people and to really speak up for yourself. And I think for people who are naturally very shy, like myself, it can be really hard to do that. But that is definitely like a big point for me, is to like ask for help when you need it, and to really engage in that like self-advocacy, like just to speak up. And last but not least, number 3, read your contract. So in teaching, a lot of times we are unionized, right? So teachers, for the most part in the United States, are part of a teachers union. We sign a contract, and then we also have like our union contract. a lot of times teachers will not know what's in their contract, and this can cause a lot of confusion. So for example, you might be wondering, am I allowed to get reimbursed, or if I spend this much money on school supplies, am I allowed to get a reimbursement for that? Those are questions that your contract might address, or like a union person might be able to answer. um, or that might not be covered in your contract at all. Maybe it's about hours. A lot of times, like, it will definitely cover the hours you need to work. So if you want to know your start and end times, like the times you're supposed to be at work, referencing your contract is really helpful. um, and a lot of times people are like, they'll already know that. I don't need to look at my contract for that. You just never know. Like, that would be my response to that. For example, if you're going to go on maternity leave, that's a very complicated process to like file for it, to know how to juggle all of that, and your contract language can really help. It can also, when you're talking to your boss, like for example, in a teacher situation, an assistant principal, knowing your contract language can really help you have a more educated conversation with that person and allow for a much like more, I guess, faster way of arriving to a solution, right? If you have a certain question about something. For any other field, for anybody else in any other field, just knowing what your contract says, whether it's just what is your HR's policy on something or things like that. That way you can be much more intentional at work, and you can make sure you're making the right decisions and make sure that you know what your rights are as a worker. And I think that it's not something that's commonly discussed, but that's stuff that you sign when you're onboarded. I think it's helpful to know what some of the major policies are. For example, vacation, leave, what happens in the event of sickness and illness, like those kinds of things are covered in a lot of the paperwork you sign. And it just makes you a much more empowered worker. Those are my 3 takeaways overall. What would you add to this list? I'm very curious. So thank you so much for watching. Comment down below if you have anything you would add to this list, and I'll see you again next time.